So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the without doubt, the most exciting panel of this afternoon. So, hey, there you go. It's great to see you. Доброго дня, пані і панове.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today at this panel discussion, we are going to talk about Ukraine at the global stage, but especially considering what happened on the other side of the Atlantic just 2 days ago. So in many respects, it will be devoted to one single area of this global stage, but to many others too. We'll discuss other areas.
We'll do both English and Ukrainian. В кого потрібно
Those in need of interpretation, we have our wonderful simultaneous interpreters here. We thank them.
Please do take the headphone set, and thanks to the fantastic interpreters that are here. So firstly, without further ado, let me introduce our stellar panel. We have joining us online, we have Michael McFaul, Professor of International Studies in Political Science at Stanford University. Professor McFaul, can you hear us? Can you see us? Not yet, not yet. Okay. Yes, Professor. It's great to see you. Greetings from Kyiv. We have Mark Voyager, former special advisor to the commanding general of the U.S. Army in Europe, senior fellow at the Center of European Policy Analysis, and the master at global relations at the American University here in Kyiv. Mark, it's great to have you. Peter Dickinson, editor of the Atlantic Council's Ukraine Alert Service. Ambassador Valery Charly, chair of the Ukraine Crisis Media Center board and former ambassador of Ukraine to the United States. And Vitaly Portnikov, Ukrainian publicist and writer. Так що всіх вітаємо. Professor,
Greet them all.
I mean, We've had a real sleepless night here in Kyiv because of the drones. We had quite severe drone debris falling over Kyiv. But I think the night before there was a lot of sleep deprivation watching the news coming from across the Atlantic. And we are trying to really understand what happened and where we go from here. So what is really how, sat here in Kyiv in this fantastic underground hall of this fantastic intercontinental hotel that has shown, by the way, phenomenal resilience. The hotel didn't close for a single day during this full-scale invasion. So we are sat here in Kyiv. You are in the US. Tell us, what should we prepare for? What should we work on, and what should we really focus on over the next couple of weeks and couple of months?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Second, I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person. As you just alluded to, we had a rather big event here in my country, and I was involved in that event. On the losing side, I want to make that very clear. I don't think anybody would be surprised by that. But you asked me what about the future, and honestly, I want to be very candid with you. I don't know, and you should not trust anybody from my country who says that they know what President-elect Trump and his administration are going to do with regard to our bilateral relationship with Ukraine and his ongoing relationship with Mr. Putin. We know what he said in the past. He helped to delay military assistance to Ukraine for 6 months. That is a fact. We know that he was involved in that. But we also know that once that vote occurred, there were large majorities in both the Senate and the U.S. Congress and the House of Representatives that voted in favor of that assistance. So both of those things are true at the same time. Second, we know his vice president elect, Mr. J.D. Vance, Senator Vance, has been even more skeptical. And I can encourage people to read what he has said about aid to Ukraine. Not our problem, not our war, far away. But I would also remind everybody on the good news side is that vice presidents generally don't make policy in terms of foreign policy, especially. And that was a bit of the frustration that Vice President Harris had, and that she was responsible in this election for policies in the Biden administration for which she had no control. And I wouldn't overplay the words that he has said. And then the third thing I would say is what my Republican friends and colleagues have been telling me for months and months. And that is that Mr. Trump actually supported Ukraine. He sent weapons to Ukraine. He did that. President Obama did not. Whether Trump himself supported that or not is up to question. I know the people that worked in his administration at the time that were big supporters of that. I'm not sure the president himself was, but that's a sign that he might be more supportive. And then the other thing I would say is that there is a divide, including people around him, about how to engage with Mr. Putin on this war. It is not a settled issue. And I don't want to name names, because if I name names, it'll discredit them for Mr. Trump, right? So I don't want to undermine them. But there are several people I know personally that have the same views that I do about what the American policy should be. And I'm hopeful that some of them might be in very senior positions in the Trump administration. Because my worst fear is that Mr. Trump believes that he can do a deal with Putin and then come deliver it to the government of Ukraine. That's naive. That would be a huge mistake. Moreover, appeasement doesn't work, never has worked in the past. It will not work in this case. And if Mr. Trump, President-elect Trump, starts to signal that he is weakening our commitment to Ukraine, and that he is, for instance, not going to renew military assistance, that, in my view, will embolden Putin. Tragically, I've spent time with Mr. Putin. I used to know him, used to deal with him, and he does not strike me as a kind of person that if he thinks his enemy is getting weaker, that will be the moment that he'll sue for peace. I think it's exactly the opposite. If we signal that we're going to be less supportive of Ukraine, that will embolden Putin, and I think that would be a tragic mistake. And I'm cautiously optimistic that some people in the Trump orbit share that view with me, and we'll just have to wait and see if those people have jobs in the new administration or not.
Well, that's a great overview, and I think we are watching very, very clearly who are those people that are going to get the jobs. But Mark, if I can bring you in, because what Professor McFaul just alluded to, the Trump orbit, you introduced the idea of a Trump-proof plan to prepare Ukraine for potential shifts in U.S. policy when Trump returns to the White House. Here we are today. What is it? What is the plan, and where does it go from here?
Yeah, Andy, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here. Just let me clarify where I stand politically. I used to work for Governor Mitt Romney, so I'm a Reaganite Republican, obviously part of the wing within the Republican Party that believes that a strong America should be committed and deeply involved in global affairs, so that we stabilize the global security order. The Trump-proof plan, Trumpostійкий plan, tak? Okay, we are in the middle of this global multi-crisis. This is another really global phenomenon, which may lead to the perfect storm that may, if not collapse the entire international order, but definitely put a strong pressure on critical, pivotal elements of this order. And an America that has retrenched behind the two oceans, obviously an isolationist America, which is what seems to be Trump's foreign policy agenda, would definitely not suffice to address properly this multi crisis of today. The way it relates to Ukraine is, as you mentioned, I mean, Ukraine as a whole, your entire society, your government, your diplomacy must prepare for this, unfortunate reality that we are in the middle of, and develop this a multi-layered, complex plan. There is no silver bullet. There is no one single magical solution, unfortunately. The plan has to involve working with, of course, inevitably with the new administration. But you have to be able to identify elements within that administration that may be more reasonable, that may be more internationally oriented. Obviously, there will be a new Congress. You know quite well, 3 of the most important committee chairs in the old Congress were staunchly pro-Ukrainian. You have to identify the new players, the new actors there. But also it includes involving NATO, especially when it comes to providing military resources within a renewed, restructured Rammstein format. That's a must. And of course, the European Union must play a role, especially when it comes to potentially offsetting some reduced funding on the part of the U.S. With the advent of the new administration. So work within the American democratic system as a whole. It's a flexible system. It's a multi-century system. Luckily, the American president is not the Tsar, the Russian Tsar. He's not an emperor. He's not omnipotent. He can do a lot of damage, but he's not. He can be. You can counter some of those effects if you know where to look for allies. Then work with the European Union, work with NATO, and of course develop Ukraine's amazing societal resilience, because your enemy is obsessed. Really, it's an imperialist persistence obsession with destroying Ukraine. You must be able to also communicate this to Europe. If you fall, I don't think you will, but if Putin gets its way, the next in line would be the next in the line of fire with Poland, of course, the Baltic states, and then further into Europe. And then you have to work with the American society to explain to the American people it's not a sideshow. This war is central to the survival of the global security order.
That's excellent. So, Peter, if I can bring you on that note, communicating with the American society. So we know who we have to communicate to. What do we communicate with? What message should Ukraine be sending today to both the society and to the new administration?
Good afternoon. Thank you for hosting me on this very interesting panel, and welcome everybody. I think one of the things that struck me today was President Zelensky sending a tweet about his phone call with Donald Trump, and using a lot of flattery, using language like an excellent phone call, wonderful victory, high praise for Trump. I think this is clearly the Ukrainian strategy at this point is in part to stroke President-elect Trump's ego. They know that this is a man who likes to be center stage, and they are trying to play on that, which I think is a smart move, a smart way of doing it. But of course, it's not enough in itself, but it's a start. And I think President Zelensky also has earned some credibility with Trump on a personal level by his conduct during the impeachment in 2019, when he could have done a lot more harm to Donald Trump, but actually stayed out of it and played dumb essentially and said, I don't want to be any part of this. And so while a lot of Trump's former colleagues now have proven very disloyal, I think President Zelensky, on the contrary, has shown that he is someone who can be trusted in that sense. And Trump even mentioned that when they met quite recently in New York. So on a personal level, I think Zelensky is in quite a good position to have a dialogue with Trump and to build on that relationship. I think more broadly, when Ukrainians are looking to engage with the American public and specifically with the new administration, I think it's absolutely crucial to emphasize the global aspect of what's happening in Ukraine. This is not just about defending Ukraine. It's not about just thwarting Putin's ambitions here in Ukraine, but it's part of a much bigger global conflict that we're seeing, which is actually getting worse and worse. Now, we have now North Korean soldiers fighting in Ukraine, thousands of them. If we're not careful, if the reaction's not strong, we may have many more North Korean soldiers fighting in Ukraine soon. Technically, North Korea is now part of this war. That's a massive escalation. We haven't heard much about that yet. I think primarily because the Biden administration didn't want to make it a major issue during the elections, because it would have essentially been a signal of the failure of their policy. It would have been essentially saying, well, this escalation management policies have failed. Now North Korea's come. Well, that's a pretty big escalation. So they didn't make a big issue of it before the election. Now I think is the time for Ukraine to really push that and say this is getting global. We have North Korea and Ukraine. We have Iran bombing Israel. We have China supporting certainly Russia, perhaps in other areas as well, also up to mischief. So the war that's taking place in Ukraine has a much broader context, and the powers that are working with Russia have a much broader scope to cause damage to American interests around the world. So I think this is really key for the Trump administration, and especially the Chinese aspect. Trump is very known for his desire to confront China and to face off against China in many spheres, certainly the economic arena. So to emphasize that in all their messaging, I think coming from Kyiv to say, guys, this is a struggle where we can't, America can't afford to sit this one out. However isolationist in instinct the Trump administration may be, and however tired the American public may be of foreign wars, they have to be in this and they have to lead on this. I think that's a very strong argument that hasn't been made in full yet and could be made a lot more forcefully in the next few months. I think that's a good chance of resonating with a lot of people who are going to be part of this administration.
Okay, thanks. So, Ambassador Charlie, pane posol, vy...
Ambassador Charlie, you represented Ukraine in Washington. You saw from the inside those people, you communicated with them. So could you share with us what is going on there, and what are their expectations, and what should we prepare for in this cooperation?
From the first thing, I want to congratulate President Joseph Biden. He is committed, since he has to go through turbulent time and provide free democratic election. My congratulations, American people. That's bad scenarios that's awaiting in Beijing and Moscow not happen. The first thing. The second, congratulations for Ukrainians, American who is with Ukrainian origin, Victoria Sparks, Andy Woodman, who is now to increase our representation in the Congress. And still we are waiting for another results, maybe very carefully for us, will happen, and we will have additional those who have origin from Ukraine. So my fellow Americans who is with origin in Ukraine, my congratulations. You have very good situation, and thanks. They support us very active to pushing the supplies weapons. Тепер стосовно того, що...
Now, let me see what I'm witnessing. Indeed, I've had the chance to work with 3 American presidents, and I communicated with them on several occasions. I'd like to thank all of them. Barack Obama, whose era is over with this election. I'm not drawing any kind of conclusions. Joseph Biden has his own story, but that was America, left-leaning America, in left transition. It's over now. The red transition is in place, and we do not know how it's going to continue. Whether America stays in conservative positions, we are not sure about that. The mono dominance is a familiar term to Ukrainians, but still, the president can influence both houses of the Congress, and this is the best possible scenario for Donald Trump. For Ukraine, there were other scenarios. I think the best one is the balance when the president's from one party and the other country controls the Congress. This is not going to happen. But we also don't have the scenario when the president is confronted by the Congress. So what we have is not the worst case scenario. Now on cooperating with the team. My forecast, on the basis of my work as an ambassador, with the work with experience of working with Donald Trump, I think I can say that the first appointments are going to be a surprise to us. They are going to be very quick because the Senate is controlled by the president. Secondly, they will not be professional appointments. We will see people who have no bureaucratic background because now president has the right to basically appoint anyone he wants. He has a free reign. He can appoint Elon Musk as chair of a newly created ministry or a special representative of the president in some matter. So as President Trump said, Elon Musk's star is on the rise because he was heavily invested in his campaign. So I think he will get his own spot in the administration. After this period of half a year or a year, we will see changes in State Department and Pentagon and other agencies. So we will see many new people there. Trump likes changing people, changing staffs. I spent in America 4 years. I worked with 3 ministers of defense, 4 national security advisors. So I saw many people, and Trump had this affinity of changing his personnel. So don't be surprised when you hear various statements like, I'm going to end the war in 24 hours. You took that emotionally, probably. But I realized that this statement should not be criticized. It should not be believed like some statements made by Ukrainian officials like Alexei Arestovich back in the day. What Ukraine should do, we had a marathon analyzing these events. 4 people sat in Washington, 4 in Kyiv. In this format, we discussed what was going on, and we made the conclusion that we need to take advantage of traditional elements of diplomacy and foreign policy and take a more creative approach too. We have quite a good rapport built between presidents. The meeting in New York was very timely. It gave us the opportunity to congratulate Donald Trump, but also to make some first initial steps. Secondly, we do not need a system of 5 managers. In American direction, we have 1+1 manager, I would say. It has to change. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has to restore its diplomatic role. The embassy has to work with 2 parties instead of 1, which is posing some problems at this juncture. Then we have to work with business associations, and in this respect, this very forum gives us a window of opportunity. We have something to offer to America. We discussed this on the margins of this conference. We have something that may be of interest to the United States. So in speaking globally, this is very important, but everyone keeps asking what's going to change on the global stage. I would be restrained here in my answer because this is not limited to President Trump. Because California alone is the 5th largest economy in the world. Texas, also very large economy. So, by way of conclusion, I would like to say that I saw direction of our enemies to the US election, and it was very undiplomatic. It was formulated as an ultimatum. They put forward an ultimatum to President-elect Trump. And let me remind all of you and our partners in Washington that back in the day in 2016, President Trump started his term of office by the proposal of leaving the START 3 treaty. The Russian Sarmat rocket is unable to pass new tests, but Minuteman III rocket has passed all the tests on the other hand. So there was a clear message to Moscow here that we have the strength and there are your groundless ultimatums. So I think that both Biden and Trump who wanted to make America great in various ways, have to provide Ukraine with ATACMS rockets. They have to allow us to strike deep into Russian territory. They have to concentrate all of their efforts here, and Trump has to continue this policy because they are our key partners, and we can offer to Donald Trump the things which so far have been used more cautiously by the current administration. The protracted war is not a good option for us. I cannot give you any other forecast to be more exact, but 50% is better than zero chance. So we have to be more optimistic in terms of this future. Thank you. Very correct statements. I think that the voice of businesses here, in terms of how we communicate with the new American administration, is important for them to understand what Ukraine is through the lens of business activities. This is of tremendous significance. Like Ambassador said, Elon Musk can even become ambassador to Ukraine. So we'll see.
So, Vitaly Portnikov, quick end of the war. We were told Trump will come and the war will be finished quickly back there. How these statements been perceived here? Thank you for that invitation, first of all, because it's very important to share views and opinions in a wartime, whether it would be quick end of the war and many years of the war. In any case, we have to continue that communication. Besides, I always say when I'm asked what we have to think about a statement of a politician, I think that statements do not matter in policy. And I always tell my colleagues, do not go to press conferences. There are no news on the press conferences. News come when decisions are made. In a modern policy, statement is a tool to get access to power, because 90% of politicians do not meet their election promises, or they give promises which cannot be met for 90%. The example is the current election program of Donald Trump, and what has been offered to the people, to the community, for 90% cannot be accomplished. But it's nice to hear, maybe to an extent someone would like to hear that the war would be finished soon. In order to finish the war soon, we don't need US-Ukrainian dialogue and not Ukrainian forced to peace, but US to have a real tools to influence on Russia and Vladimir Putin. And it doesn't really matter what is the name of the president of US, but it matters the absence of these leverages. Thanks to the recent years, because of Russian-Ukrainian war, we realized that US almost get lost of these leverages. We live in the world of two economies, Western American, G7, and China, India, enormous states that adhere absolutely different values, absolutely different principles. And when US and Western states would like to undermine economically the breaking states, assisting these states to withstand, develop its economy, its military-industrial complex, support its stability, and spit in the eyes of the world. That's the world where Iran, North Korea, Russian Korea can easily and bravely look in the future. Iran is under severe sanctions for decades and sell to Russia its drones, fire Russians by its missiles. That's the country living without SWIFT, without credit cards, without regular business, but it's still the state able to develop its defense industry. I'm not even mentioning the North Korea, but they all depend on Chinese money. If you want to finish the war with Ukraine, you have to start economic war with China. You have to introduce sanctions against Chinese companies. You have to introduce sanctions against US companies who has manufacturing places in China. You should not place Musk as an advisor, but also place sanctions against Musk companies, forcing him to withdraw his production from China and also India, as with all my due respect, still also the terrorist sponsor in the world. If we're not ready to repulse Chinese readiness to create another alternative political and economic world, you have to finish the conflict based on Chinese and Russian provisions and recognize that you lost the leading role in the global world and your leverages are not working anymore. And that's the choice, and that's the choice of Joseph Biden, and that will be the choice of Donald Trump. I assume that Donald Trump presidency will be the symbol of collapse of global power of United States and emerging of those bipolar world of democracies versus dictatorship, where democracies would be forced to cooperate with dictatorship and agree with some areas of influence of those dictatorships. So in order to finish the war, we have to meet three preconditions. The first, to stop Russian troops, and to do so we need arms, ammunition, and ability to destroy Russian arsenals. Secondly, that would be infrastructural resilience. Like this year, like next year, and upcoming years, there would be enormous attempts to destroy that infrastructure, so Ukrainians would be frozen to death and flee out of Ukraine. That has to be stopped by protecting Ukrainian sky and cities and towns. Without that, Ukraine will end up to be a democratic shortage, and we have to stop that process. And thirdly, to prevent Russia spending money on war without any achievements. And there is a very simple conclusion from each of these points. We have to support Ukrainian military, Ukraine economy, and slow down Russian economy and Russian military by confronting China's People Republic as the lead sponsor of Moscow military efforts. That's a very basic plan. But if we not adhere to that, we can speak on sessions, do the press conference, say that we'll do America great again. I agree with President Trump. In order to make America great again, you have to take a risk. Better risk of a real confrontation with the state which Trump believes is the major problem for US. China, not Russia. Russia is proxy of China. It's Hezbollah among the snow against China. And if we share that view of Donald Trump, we have to ask President Trump and his administration, how far are they content to go? Do they realize that the blood or the step towards that direction is a real step to the Third World War, where we can find the balance between confronting China and Russia and the fear of the Third World War, which Russia and China will exploit, and Putin constantly reminds about its nuclear ammunition. If it would be professionally managed and this policy would be developed, we have a chance in the nearest 10 years to resolve that problem and get back to the world where democracies will again win and overrun and would be valuable. If we can resolve this problem just by statements on the meetings or phrases that we will make America great again, that would be just another beautiful phrase in the books of history, which will demonstrate the collapse of the Western world and failure of United States to influence the global economy. And then we would be clear that we live in a period that could be compared with the erosion of ancient Rome, when empire inhabitants were thinking that we're living in the greatest country, but barbarians sitting next to the walls already were sharing the values and precious spoils of war. I don't want to end up in such a way. Thank you. Thank you, dear Vitaly. That was strong. Professor McFaul.
Strong points made from the panel. I think really it's how do we stop Russia? So if Ukraine is being attacked by one nuclear power, now it's being attacked by two nuclear powers, with the North Koreans already fighting against Ukraine. And it's really, getting the support. Will, the Trump administration help to stop Russia? Will it help to continue arming Ukraine?
Again, I don't know. And I don't trust anybody who thinks that they do know. I associate my personal convictions with many of the speakers, but I listen to them, and I'm sitting here in the United States of America after one of the biggest elections we've had in a long time with respect to foreign policy, and I'm hearing a big disconnect. Remember, in this election, We had one candidate that was an isolationist and one that was an internationalist. The isolationist won. We had one candidate that spoke about democratic values and framed things just like Vitaly did, autocrats versus Democrats. That's the title of my next book, by the way. That's what I'm writing about. But the other candidate doesn't speak in those terms. President Trump doesn't speak in those terms. He admires President Putin. He admires Kim Jong-un. He even has said nice things about Xi Jinping. So I hope that he changes that, and I hope that his team might change that. But I think we need to be realistic here, folks, about who just was elected the President of the United States. It's not somebody framing our struggles as one between autocrats and Democrats. That's Mike McFaul. My side didn't win this election. And third, Trump is a unilateralist. The other candidate was a multilateralist. He doesn't believe in allies. He was very skeptical of them. Read John Bolton's book, everybody. Don't have any illusions about what he thinks in terms of the usefulness of allies. Now, again, I think our job now is to convince him and his team that some of those positions were wrong. And I'm going to get up every day to do that. That's what I'm going to do. But I think we need to maybe use their language if we're going to appeal to them. So let's talk about something that Trump really cares about. Trump really cares about burden sharing. He talks about it all the time. You know, if those countries, I'm paraphrasing, right? But he said as a candidate, he said, if those countries in NATO, if they don't spend more, then I'm going to let Putin do whatever the hell he wants to them. That's what Trump said. So why not turn that on its head? I think it is a necessary condition for peace in Europe that Ukraine is a member of NATO. That, I think, is in my country's interest. I actually think it's in Putin's interest, too. We can talk about that later if you're interested. But we need to convince Trump of that fact. Not me, not people that think like us on this panel. We need to convince Trump. I think the argument needs to be turned around. Right now, if this war ends, when this war ends, Ukraine, your warriors will be the greatest military army in Europe, the most powerful, the most capable, with the best weapons. Instead of thinking about what Ukraine needs from NATO, we need to start talking about what Ukraine will provide to NATO. I think your soldiers could be deployed in other countries. I think your weapons, you've made some fantastic achievements in terms of new weapons, better than the Americans have in terms of unmanned vehicles right now. You should talk about how you would be a net provider of those of security for the rest of the alliance, so that we could focus more of our attention on sending our soldiers and our weapons to the Asian theater. That's the kind of argument I think that will appeal to this Trump crowd. I'm not saying it's going to be successful, but I think we have to begin to frame our arguments in terms of ones that will appeal to Mr. Trump. And with regard to what President Zelensky's been doing, I think that's exactly right. He has to start saying, we welcome this cooperation, but now frame it in terms of ways that Trump can go to Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania and say, because we're cooperating with Ukraine, that will reduce our burden of the burden sharing that we have in Europe. Those are the kinds of new arguments that tragically I think we need to begin making here in the United States.
Thank you, Professor McFaul. Віталій Портніков, це що каже професор McFaul.
So what Professor McFaul says, not what we can take from NATO, but what we can give to NATO, offer to NATO. What can we give to NATO? In order to give something to NATO, we have to be invited to NATO, first of all. And that's obvious for me, because if alliances are thinking that inviting Ukraine to NATO would lead to a direct clash with the Russian Federation, and they would like to prevent that clash, they have to endorse the decision based on that understanding. And from my point of view, and I constantly say that, and that's important, if Ukraine would be covered by NATO guarantees, that would not lead to the escalation, but that would stop the war. Because from my point of view, I don't know whether Professor McFaul would agree, and we were working, both of us, in Moscow when he was ambassador in Moscow, in Russian Federation, and I was a journalist highlighting some Russian reality. No one is prepared for nuclear war in Moscow. And I think when we say that Ukraine can provide NATO in terms of capable, efficient military, as Professor McFaul mentioned, as many politicians in Ukraine say, I think the state covered by nuclear assurances do not need strong, capable military. Our neighbors sit under the nuclear umbrella of the Soviet Union, of the United States, correction. And unless they sit under this umbrella, they can focus on economy, welfare, and from us, our neighbors require to have a capable military because we do not have this nuclear umbrella. And then they tell us that when we'll join NATO, maybe we can bring a capable military to NATO under the nuclear umbrella are not that clear. And we realize being part of NATO without full territorial integrity, we will have a guarantees that we will not deploy that military first to restore, to gain our territories back. And that automatically will lead to reduce that capable military in times. Again, these are realities that we have to consider. So I'm a follower, not to explain to NATO what we can give in terms that the nuclear war of nuclear power states is inevitable. If we believe it is inevitable, Ukraine is the first stronghold on the way to the war, the first territory that would be bombed by tactical nuclear ammunition before deploying strategic nuclear ammo on Washington. But that's utopia. It's still the restraining armament. And if we will end up in the world when non-nuclear state deploys nuclear armaments against nuclear state, that would be a different reality. I will speak separately. I think we will not end up in this world. Russia will fear to do so as well. But if we live in the world in which we are, we should think not about Ukrainian military efficiency and sharing experience with nuclear militaries, which sits under nuclear umbrella and do not need that. But we have to be part of the military. We should be part of the club of the states which do not need the capable militaries. We just need to move to a different league from the league of people being killed without any punishment because they are defending themselves against the nuclear armament, to the league of the states which can enjoy the peace and stability and observe as we, as the gladiators on the political arena, in fact, defending ourselves from this nuclear state. So let us not think what we can do, what we can give to NATO, but what NATO can give us. Just one thing, possibility not to disappear. And we can provide NATO a lesson learned what may happen with a state which does not sit under nuclear safety umbrella. Or if Russia still will nuke Ukraine, that would be a different lesson when 2 years after there would be not 5, not 7 nuke states, but 25 or 30 nuclear, or later on 45 or 50 nuclear-owned states. So these two passes that may take place in the nearest years, and we have to remember that. Valery Chali. So what we would like to see what President Trump can give to Ukraine. You met with Trump, you worked with Trump, you can understand the way he thinks, what he may wish from Ukraine. Well, I listened very carefully to Professor McFaul, and I can agree that perception in Kyiv and in California are absolutely different. Many of those in California now wait for a new deportation, for a new program of deportation, stated in the biggest program in Ukrainian history since Eisenhower times. So Californians are more focused on some internal promises in terms of external promises, let's be honest. We had expectations twice on summits that there would be a decision made by acting administration to do the first political step, not NATO accession, just invitation, negotiations in order to raise the standards. Our frontline standards are there, our interoperability is there, because the systems deployed by our troops, more than any NATO nation is now being familiar with. We are missing few internal reform elements for law enforcement reform, but having the political will, the security service reform, law enforcement reform, half a year, maximum a year, could be done. We were waiting for a long time. Both US did not made this step. Whether the next president will be brave enough to do this step, I don't know. Nothing been said. We ended up in a very difficult situation. We want and we ask Joseph Biden now, who has to leave some memory and sign, do this step now, in these 2 months. Give us all the armament. Give us possibility to strike storages, as you saw yesterday, military facilities, ships, warships, and that would save lives of people, even Russians. That's very humane. Accurate missiles, artillery. In opposite, not having this armament, single ATACMS, and these are my calculations, very tentative, in intensive warfare would save life of at least 30 of our soldiers and 150 Russians, if you would think about humanity.
And there are signs of that change in policy. I just had conversations the other day, and there are no signs that this policy is changing, unfortunately. So therefore, Mr. McFaul, we treat a US election the way you asked us to treat it. We treat it as the choice of the American people. Like you treat Ukrainian elections as the choice of the Ukrainian people. There are a lot of risks at hand, of course, but for me it's easier to treat it in a more positive way because I have worked in these conditions. This is a déjà vu situation to me. The 2016 election is similar. I have always been in favor of a woman as president, but the time hasn't come to that. I thought this would happen this time, but not regressively. So, regardless of that, we are going to work with this administration that was chosen by the Ukrainian people, by the American people. As I have said, I have worked with 3 American administrations, with Democrats and Republicans alike. What we did with Barack Obama, I thank Mr. McFaul in this regard. We did the sanctions policy, and Ambassador McFaul heads the sanctions working group. But we still do not have a complete package of sanctions. Russians use ways to circumvent them. Oil routes for Russians are closed only by 20%. Of course, we need to influence Russian economy, but the reality is different, as we can see. Back in the day, we had fewer expectations and less hope. But when I witnessed discussion that took place in the past, Donald Trump assuming power evoked a discussion on what was going to happen, and there were different statements. But what happened in the Ukrainian direction of foreign policy of the United States? We got anti-tank missiles. We were able to completely overcome the ban on supplying lethal weapons to Ukraine, and that was related not only to javelins. We got anti-sniper rifles. We had electronic warfare means supplied, and this was something that we did not get from Barack Obama. At the very first meeting with Barack Obama, I got his response on what were the limitations of US support to Ukraine. Do you really think that in 2014 or 2015 we did not want to take a harsher stance in Russia? We wanted to do it, but we did not have the means to do it. And this position was gradually entrenched in the United States. In the end, we got the weapons that we needed. During the Obama administration, we had contracts for all sorts of weapons, for attack helicopters. We had contracts for Patriot air defense systems. So this is our problem. We proposed Americans to send these helicopters to us. But the new American administration came and said that we are going to make these contracts with other companies because there has been the change of government. Why was that done? This is the experience and we need to use this experience. They want our engines and we put in a lot of effort to throw Russians away in terms of engines production. We talked about it. Where is that M843 engine that was technologically ready to be supplied? We discussed joint production of planes in Kharkiv. Where is that factory? There was a factory in which, a munition factory in which Americans were ready to invest, and we were able to find those investments. So this is again our problem. Some decisions in Ukraine demand more than one presidency. We need to understand that we have to work with Americans strategically, not based on who's president. And the same happens in America too, but they are still more consistent than us. We did not have a systemic approach before. We did not have any systemic approach on Nord Stream 2. And when I made a presentation in Washington on Nord Stream, American partners claimed that I had some illogical stance on this. But eventually Nord Stream was cut off. But Joseph Biden, unfortunately, you may remember meetings in Geneva in 2021, war could have started back then. Americans said to Russians, you can have everything you want, just don't start the war, please. And Putin took it as a sign of weakness. You can give any sort of assessment to Donald Trump, but this is only one person. There are many other people who are going to make decisions. Many of them are coming back now, and we need to work with every one of them. They respect strength. They respect a strong position. So coming back to your question, Andrei, in terms of javelins, I saw that for Donald Trump, it's better to have a fair deal. This is what he wants. It means that it has to be bilateral. It means that America stands to get something from the deal. Oh, I'm not going to reveal all the secrets how we did it with javelins, but we also purchased something from Americans in return. Of course, we are worried, we are anxious that the Americans have not allocated new funding for Ukrainians. And in December, in budget considerations for December, there are no new packages of support. Why our partners are not discussing new aid packages? You know why? Because everyone thinks that the war will be over by summer 2025. Businesses here know all their partners abroad. That was the opinion even last year. And there is this sentiment. It is felt. We have air packages for the summer. The supplies are going to continue, but not later than that. We need to start these discussions now. We need to start discussions on the budget and the aid that is going to be provided. We need to start discussing the titanium capabilities of Ukraine. The president started this discussion, but eventually we sold the factory to Azerbaijanis. In Homel, in Belarus, oil was found, and Ukraine is probably going to transit that oil. And in Tolyatti, the same can happen. We can eventually find ourselves transiting Russian oil. So do we plan to throw Russia off the equation, or do we plan to play those geopolitical equations, geopolitical games? Vitaly Portnikov here gave his own view. So I think that on strategic level, we need to reach an agreement among the countries of the West. If we are ready to become an American ally and a fortress of America in Central and Eastern Europe, you may remember that President Duda called a fortress in Poland, Fort Trump. Instead of Poland, we can become that Fort Trump as a country for America. I am a staunch supporter of NATO. You know that Ukraine needs to be admitted to NATO, but in all honesty, I think that in the next year or two, this is not going to happen. So, because of that, a defense pact with a nuclear country, with the United States, should be in place. This is difficult to achieve. If we are not able to do that, we can start with a defense pact with Baltic states and Poland. This, of course, can undermine NATO, but we cannot wait any much longer. We can produce our own missiles with our technologies, with American help, and Americans and other countries could finance it. We can produce 200 missiles. I'm speaking hypothetically here, of course. I'm talking about the sort of conversation we can have with this new administration. We have 200 Neptune missiles that can reach Moscow. But we do not have enough missiles to strike all the objects where North Koreans are based, for instance. So what can we do? We can launch 200 or 300 missiles on Moscow to suppress their intentions. I'm not simply saying something that is going to be published and circulated by Russian newspapers. I'm simply saying that we do not have enough missiles, and the only way out for us is to strike Moscow, because this is the weapon of deterrence. This may provoke some kind of a shocked reaction. So instead of that, Americans could help us by supplying us 900 on 1,000 missiles, and that will give us the chance to deter Russia without attacking it. Lastly, I just saw the name of this panel mentioning war in Ukraine, and this is actually an incorrect, outdated term. This is not the war in Ukraine anymore. Our colleagues stated here about North Korean war role in it. And because of that, we have a completely different picture. This is a global confrontation. Regional war is the next step here. Cyber war has been going on. More than 15 countries have switched to the attacking strategy, not the defense strategy in cyber war. This is the Russian war against Europe, not against Ukraine. And I think soon it will be a war against the United States. Because the head of Pentagon said that if there is an attack against South Korea, we are going to defend it because we have a nuclear umbrella there. So we need to consider the changes. And now Ukraine is not just a fortress of NATO or the United States. We need not wait for NATO. We need to talk on bilateral basis with the United States. We need to take that stance. So if you want if we want, for instance, to get military assistance from the United States, we can provide the United States with uranium and other resources. This is what we can propose. European partners may express their grievance because of that, but we can take it. If Americans are not able to agree to this, we should reorient all of our partnerships to the European Union. We will need to create a sub-regional system of security instead of transatlantic security. This is a hard decision, but Ukraine has to seize the initiative. We need to propose things. We need to propose new initiatives instead of agreeing to this protracted war that leads to hundreds of casualties and thousands of wounded soldiers. We can't engage in a protracted long-term war with Russia. Next year, the war will continue, but in a different format, because we need to achieve what we need. And our partners know what we need: political will and partnership. The 47th president is going to be different from the 45th.
Дякую, пане Валерій.
Thank you, dear Valery. Mark Voyager. So, you are an ex-advisor to a senior general of U.S. Army here in Europe. We're already speaking about the upcoming year. Today, the president of United States is Joe Biden. So we have to survive the end of the year. So the question, the legacy. We have $6 billion on accounts, armament. What could be done in upcoming 2 or 3 months under the Joe Biden presidency, so Ukraine would receive that? Thank you, Andrei, for the perfect question. You asked in Ukrainian, and I will reply in Ukrainian. You know the position of my ex-boss, General Hodges, Republicanist and Reaganist, and he supported Kamala for 100%, and he was actively pursuing in social media, drawing attention against re-electing Trump. What Biden can do in these 2 months, he must do everything and even more, everything that has not been done. Even some psychological delays that took place among his advisors, in particular Jake Sullivan, who sees himself as a new Kissinger. He's not obviously the new Kissinger, but sort of his dream that he will balance the global security system collapsed. So we need to make sure that all money that you mentioned, $6 billion, to be given to Ukraine as quickly as possible. I'm not that optimistic as His Excellency Ambassador Charlie. We Americans criticize our system, and you are even more optimistic than we are. Secondly, ATACMS. Yes, sure, absolutely must have, just to lift all the restrictions and limitations the armed forces of Ukraine could strike on troops, on storages. Is there a hope that President Biden, well, there is no time to wait. This could be his final opportunity to really support you, to really help you in such a way. Whatever restricted him before elections, there is no time to wait anymore. So I do hope that these 2 upcoming months would be an opportunity to be seized very actively by President Biden to place Ukraine in the best, strongest position before Trump returns to the White House. Thank you. I don't know if there are any questions in the room. If not, I think the time has already been exhausted, but I really would like to ask that all our panelists, just 60 seconds each, would do a quick summary, a generic overall summary, and the panel subject shaping the future, the wartime Ukraine on the global stage.
What is the future wartime Ukraine on the global stage?
Well, I think that the word that I've used a lot in the last 24 hours, and I spoke to some journalists, I was giving an interview, and they said the word they've heard more than anything else is unpredictable. Trump is the most unpredictable American politician for this generation and perhaps ever. So it really is a leap into the dark. I think what we can say is that the era of escalation management is over. And we're now going into a very unpredictable period. We shall see, but Ukraine still has majority support in America. It still has the support of Europe. There is no reason for desperation at this point. but Ukraine needs to work hard now to win over the Trump administration and convince them that this is something that they should be committed to, that this is America's fight, and that this is a global contest where America needs to demonstrate its leadership. I think that's very possible to win that argument, and I'm certainly not overly pessimistic, but it's an argument that still needs to be, they need to be convinced, and the next few months will be absolutely crucial. I don't personally believe that Trump knows exactly what he wants to do on Ukraine. I think it's still an open question. So it's all to play for, as it were. And Ukraine is still very much, one thing we can say with certainty, I think, is that Ukraine is the top priority the top foreign policy priority for the Trump administration, which is good news. The question now is to make sure that the decisions that are made are the right decisions for Ukraine and for the world.
Super. Thank you, Peter. Professor McFaul, I don't know if you're still with us, but a 60-second summary on the shaping the future wartime Ukraine on the global stage.
It'll be 30 seconds because I have to run to another interview. I think what happens in Ukraine has big consequences for America's place in the world. If somehow we believe that appeasement will work and we can walk away from Ukraine, weakness in Europe will make us look weak in Asia. It'll make us look weak in the Middle East. And I think we need to help our new friends and colleagues who come into the Trump administration to understand that these things are all intertwined. And likewise, victory in Ukraine, which in my definition includes Ukraine into NATO, makes us stronger in Europe, and that in turn makes us stronger in Asia and makes us stronger throughout the rest of the world. And with that, I have to run. Thanks for having me. We'll be in touch another time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Mark, your 60 seconds, sorry.
Okay. Так, наступного року
Next year, Americans, Republicans will celebrate a quarter of a century, 250 years. So our democratic experiment survived many challenges and should survive the Trump as well, so the Trump would not destroy that unique democracy. Same as Ukraine with its thousands years of experience, you have to survive Trump. But as we start our discussion, your unique democratic resilience require complete mobilization of your society, total and full and exclusive, both military and civilians working together as it happened at the beginning of the war. Only then you can win, of course, with external support from NATO, Europe, and hopefully with a smart elements of US society contribution. Valery, Charlie. Well, we encouraged to be realists, but what we say, whether it has any impact, Ukraine been withdrawn 15 years in the past in terms of infrastructure, in terms of economy. We really would like to change the structure of economy, but there are no reasons not to change it anymore. In terms of human potential, we lost and we keep losing further. So Ukraine needs, in order to stay sovereign, independent, that will happen. And the people who stayed in Ukraine, I thank you for being in Kyiv all together, and business working in this difficult environment, and economy under the war with enormous support from partners. Unless we wish Ukraine after the large-scale war would stay a gray buffer zone or even more, would get face towards Moscow, you would say it's a utopia. No, Georgia shows us that everything may happen. Moldova, the situation is facing very difficult situation. So I think we should not again enter this bipolar world. We should shape alliances, unions. Ukraine will not survive on its own. We should have a strong alliances, an umbrella with US, with UK, with NATO. These could be influential nuclear states, UK again. But without partners, our future is difficult. I may be optimistic in 20 years, for sure. The paradox is that I'm confident in Ukraine in 20 years. But these 15 years, we have to make that way that people who live farther would never be bothered by the war, but would speak only economic projects and development. Vitaly Portnikov.
Ideas. Great, America great again, and have Ukraine peaceful again. And way of this position, the real eyes of the world, the victory of the geopolitical concurrence in China, the victory of the geopolitical concurrence in Russia, the end of conflicts in Ukraine, in Middle East, in other regions of the world, at a real way of the monopoly of the democratic world. Це і є насправді відповідь.
This is the actual answer to all the questions. If we really want to see America great, we have to see Americans real world in the global environment, able to stop conflicts and undermining the international law. Otherwise, there will be no great America and no peaceful Ukraine. We have to realize that. Thank you, dear panelists. Thank you, Professor McFaul. And I would like to conclude. Дякуємо.
Thank you. Я думаю, що
I think the main message that we can deliver, that Kyiv stands, Ukraine stands, and business stands united. Thank you, business that runs its operations. This resilience is absolutely incredible, demonstrating the world that could be done. Ukraine is open for business. It's risky to invest in Ukraine, but it's even more risky not to invest in Ukraine.
American Chamber of Commerce, I want to thank you all for this fantastic discussion. Thank you to our fantastic panelists. I think we have really interesting times ahead. We do expect surprises. We expect President Trump and the new administration to surprise us. We don't know what the surprises will be, but I think it's so important that we work hard now to identify who we will be working with, when we will be working with them, and starting now and really getting those messages across. But the main message is that business, you are here, Ukraine is open for business, and we continue to support Ukraine. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you. God bless America and God bless Ukraine. Slava Ukraini!